You booked it, episode 189. What's going on, everyone? Thank you for joining me today on You Booked It, the #1 podcast where you learn how to create a successful entertainment career. I am excited to announce your new entertainment industry platform, the You Booked It community, is now free for everyone. Inside, you'll be able to chat and connect with Broadway performers, Emmy nominees, top choreographers, past podcast guests, and people just like you navigating this wild and crazy entertainment industry. Build industry relationships, learn how to create a successful entertainment career, and join in on live masterclasses with the industry's top leading professionals from Broadway and beyond. Tap the link in the show notes and I'll send you your invite link. And now, let's meet today's guest. Okay, let's get it started. I am excited to introduce my guest today, Chris Agos. Are you ready for this, Chris?
Well, as my dad used to say, I am as ready as I'll ever be, so let's do it.
Right on. Chris has enjoyed every minute of his 25-year career as an actor and voiceover guy. He has appeared in TV shows across various networks and streaming services, lent his face and voice to dozens of top advertisers, and performed in thousands of corporate projects. He is the author of several books, including Acting in Chicago, the go-to resource for actors looking to establish and grow their career in the Midwest, and the VoiceOver Startup Guide, which shows readers how to navigate the voiceover industry through simple step-by-step instructions combined with instructional audio downloads. His most recent book is titled Commercial VO Strategies, Tell a Story, Land the Job. Chris, that is a very, very abridged and quick intro of who you are and what you've done. But why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, fill in the gaps, and a little bit more about what you do as a professional in the entertainment industry?
Sure, Dane. First of all, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate being able to speak with you. It's great to chat. It's always a little weird when somebody's like, hey, tell me a little about yourself. But I would say that first and foremost, I'm a dad and a husband. Everything I do is with my family's best interest in mind. And professionally speaking, that intro was a pretty decent summary. I'm someone who got into acting almost by accident. Back when I started, I just wanted to do voiceover. I was in college in Chicago. I was on my way to medical school, believe it or not, when I needed a break from studying. I took a few voiceover lessons and that hooked me. I made a deal with my parents that I was going to put off med school for a while and try VO. And that led to on-camera work, and it just snowballed from there. So today, I'm, I guess you would say, a working class actor and voiceover guy in LA. I do a lot of stuff that isn't very visible. I work in a lot of different areas of the business and tend not to focus on any one particular area unless that winds up happening organically. But for example, in a normal year, I split my time about evenly between on-camera work and voiceover. But of course, lately, there hasn't been a whole lot of on-camera work going around. So these days, I'm mostly in the voiceover booth. And of course, after you've been doing this for a while, people start asking you about it. So I've been teaching and writing books for a little over 10 years now. And I've been leaning into that with the industry, on hold the way it is right now. There's still a need for a lot of information, and I try to fill that need if I can. So that's the past 25 years all in a nutshell.
Yeah, very cool. And I think you're right, especially with the VO world. I know from speaking with a lot of actors that the VO world has become a very popular thing to figure out how to make work, right, during this entire pandemic time. So I can imagine all of your information has become very valuable for a lot of people.
It's true that the voiceover business has changed dramatically in the past, even just the past 10 years, forget the past 25. Technology has really democratized it and made it so that anybody with $100 worth of USB microphone and some free software can at least give it a go. There has been an explosion in the number of people who are trying to make it work. And for some of them, it works. For some of them, it doesn't. And it's its own beast. I think that's what's important to remember is that it's acting, but it's a sort of special little division of acting that has its own skill set. So yeah, it's important to know what it is that you're signing up for before you invest a lot of time or money.
For sure. I think that goes with a lot of things, A lot of us think it's so easy to jump into whatever the project might be, and then you go, oh, wait, this takes a lot, not just from maybe just monetary investment, but the time that it takes to really hone those skills and perfect them.
Absolutely. And voiceover comes really easy to some people, and for other people, it doesn't at all. Some people think of it as just reading out loud. I know I did when I was new, and it's not at all that. It just helps to do a deep dive, whether that's in books or on YouTube or in podcasts or whatever. There's so much free information available out there now that you ought to be able to get a pretty good sense of what if your strengths play to that industry or not. One thing is that voice actors spend a ton of time alone. And that's just not for everyone. You know, if you're one of these actors that think that are like, you really get off on that positive reinforcement, you just really, the applause is like the best part of the show at the end.
Yeah.
You're not going to get that in VO ever. So if you're looking for that, it's not at all the same. It's helpful to know that before you go into it.
I'd say so.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's move on to our first section here. And Chris, look, I am a sucker for a good quote. What is your favorite quote you'd like to share with everyone?
There's an old Japanese proverb, I think, at least legend has it that this is a Japanese proverb. And I like it a lot. I'm probably not going to get it exactly right, but it's something that I come to time and again. And it's this: don't fix the blame, fix the problem.
Oh, that's really good. I've not heard that on the show. Can you delve into that and expand on that a bit and how it's applied to your career?
Yeah, I like it because it makes me approach problems with a solution mentality instead of a victim mentality, which I think is a really important distinction for anyone trying to get anything done. There's just not much value in assigning blame. It might make you feel good for a minute to be able to point to somebody and say, you caused this, you're the reason I can't do X, Y, Z. But in the end, that's not going to solve your problem. So I find myself pulling that quote out from time to time when my knee-jerk reaction is to just blame something or someone. It just feels like a much more productive use of my time and energy to address the problem, fix the problem instead of the blame. And that, of course, looks different depending on what the issue is that you're confronted with. But I'm always going back to that quote.
Yeah, I really like that. I think having complete ownership in whatever you do is paramount. And it's accepting and owning the good stuff and the bad stuff. You can't just have all the positivity. Bad things happen and unfortunate things happen, and you need to own those. And I think by doing that puts you in the habit of being solution oriented more often, because you initially think, oh yeah, I'll just unload this issue onto something else by blaming something else. But like you said, nothing goes away. It's still there. It doesn't solve anything. Who was I reading? I was reading, I think it was a book by Grant Cardone. I don't know if you've read anything from him.
I know the name.
Yeah, he's a big real estate guy. He's all over Instagram and everything like this, but really good stuff comes out of him. But he said, you got to own everything down to, even if you got rear-ended, for instance, driving around, he's like, it's your fault. Take it. He's like, it took you had to be at that exact specific place at that exact specific time in the world for you to get rear-ended, right? He's like, you could have left your house 5 seconds earlier or 5 seconds later and it wouldn't have happened. And he takes it to the extreme level of that. But by doing that, then you do take ownership of everything and you can move forward and always be progressing.
I agree. And I also think with ownership comes control. For me, it's a control issue. And I can't control what anybody else does, whether it's somebody who's auditioning for the same role I'm auditioning for, or whether it's, like you said, somebody who rear-ended me. I have nothing to do with them. The only thing I can correct or change or alter in any way is my own actions, my own worldview, my own opinions, my habits. I don't know. I like the idea of taking control. And I think I like that because so much of an actor's career really can feel like everything is out of our control, right? Like somebody else is making the decisions for us. And to a certain extent, you look at the reality, that is true. We are dependent on other people. Nobody is successful in a vacuum in our business. But also, where are you going to spend your energy? Are you going to spend your energy wishing and hoping that somebody else is going to change? Or are you going to spend it internally and work to better your own station in life, your own worldview? I just think that's a much more productive outlook.
I agree. Yeah, so good. And let's get into this next section here. And Chris, of course, you are an entertainer. I'm an entertainer. And I think that you'd agree that this industry can be one of the most subjective, brutally honest, and personally emotional industries in existence. And you know as well as I that in order to create and have a successful career in this industry, like you're having now, takes a lot of dedication and hard work. And while, yes, there is an outrageous amount of fun and excitement doing what we do, there are also our fair share of obstacles, challenges, and failures we are going to experience and we're going to have to move forward through. So tell us, what is one key challenge, obstacle, or failure you've experienced in your career, and how did you come out the other side better because of it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's a big question because when you've been around as long as I have, and I've seen a lot of ups and downs, and I've obviously lived through tons of challenges. That's just the nature of the business. But I think looking back, I think the biggest challenge for a lot of actors, I know it was for me and still is, it can be, is how to deal with the income roller coaster.
Yeah.
For me, when I first started, I wanted to be a voiceover guy and then I wanted to be an actor, but I also wanted to pay my bills. And one didn't always allow me to do the other. And this was when I was working in Chicago. And after a few years of spinning my wheels, I started to have some wins, but I also had tough times with no work. And I realized that the stress I felt during those lean times was really having an impact on my acting. You know, when I felt like I didn't have any money, that just heightened my anxiety. It put me in the state where I had to book work. I had to do well in every single audition. I had to get it. And of course, we all know how wonderful that is for your auditions. It's like the worst thing ever. So I needed to find a way to deal with that anxiety. And through classes and getting to know people, I began to realize that there were all these separate corners of the industry, these different areas that I could work in. And they were all related to acting, but they weren't front and center in terms of visibility. You know, I always thought of actors as people who did TV shows and movies and musicals and all of that. But there's this whole other side, this whole like sleeper industry that actors work in. And it provides really good income security because the numbers just work in your favor so much more so in those areas. So these are things like corporate VO and print work and using the ear prompter, even like standardized patient work or doing trade shows when we're not in a pandemic. I mean, admittedly, This is not like sexy work that everyone grows up dreaming that they want to do, but breaking into that side of things and working regularly in those categories of work allowed me to buy the time I needed to get a foot in the door in terms of the work that I really wanted to do. So once I realized that if I could learn how to work in those areas, that would help me out with my income roller coaster. I just went all in on those things. And I really have to say that the result is that I've put together a long career. I've been able to stay in the business this long, and it's been very stable. And even today, in the middle of a pandemic, when there's not a lot of the work that you would traditionally think actors would do, things like voiceover are picking up the slack. So because of this concept of diversification in work, because it saved my bacon so much and so many times, I really made that the foundation for the book acting in Chicago. And I preach this whole idea of be willing to do things that you never imagined yourself doing and be willing to try new things because you might find that one thing that's really going to smooth out your income bumps. I preach that a lot.
Yeah, be willing to do everything. I love that mentality. I like it so much because it's also the way I've managed and conducted my entire career through this industry. Is I've never really worked outside of the industry, but I've done all, like you said, these little sleeper corners of the industry that are all connected. And what I find is the more you do them, not only are you expanding your skill set, but you're expanding your relationships and your network within the industry. And eventually they all oddly start tying back together. For instance, one path that I had was I started performing, and then I was on a show and some unfortunate events happened. They're like, hey, can you ASM this show? I said, yeah, I can figure it out. Sure. That led to ASMing. That led to stage managing, to calling the show. That connected me with other stage managers that got me on stage managing other shows, which then connected me to then the corporate production and stage management side of things, which is a whole nother world. And that roller coaster just keeps going on. And I think it's so cool to do that and just keep saying yes.
I think that's a great example of the benefit of that mentality, but also you were willing to take the opportunity when it presented itself. And I just think that we can plan for anything, we can envision anything we want, but it's
Right.
pretty rare that it happens exactly the way we think it's going to. I remember
Yeah.
a really quick story. I went to Vegas when I was like 21 with a buddy. We did the weekend thing, your typical go drink too much, gamble some money, and just be there, just to be there. And I remember
Yeah.
thinking this was like right as I was starting. I was new at the whole acting thing. I hadn't really gotten my footing yet, but I was trying. And I remember making this statement in my head, like thinking, you know what? The next time I go to Vegas, it's going to be under totally different circumstances. I'm going to be one of these high roller guys. I'm going to be asked in, the casinos, they have their whale hunters and they like bring guys in and because you
Yeah.
gamble a lot, I'm going to be one of those guys and it's going to be totally different. And acting is going to be the thing that's going to bring me there. And it was like a decade later. I didn't go, I didn't go to Vegas for a decade after that. But the next time I went to Vegas, I was not a whale, but I was being paid. And I was being paid a lot of money to be there. It was not a leisure trip, it was a work trip. And I was like, you know what? This isn't how I imagined it, but I kind of got there. I mean, I
Yeah.
didn't have to pay my way to go. I did not have to pay for my accommodations. Granted, I didn't have a $500,000 credit line at a casino, but it still felt like a win. It was still like, this is
Yeah.
cool. And I was there presenting at a trade show. And it was like a week-long gig and it was a 5-figure payday. And I was like, you know what? I'll take this. This is cool. Just be willing to try those things because you might reach those goals. The path just might be not at all what you imagined for yourself.
So true. And let's move on to a time that I like to call your spotlight moment. That one moment in time you realized, yes, I am going to be an entertainer for a living. Or maybe it was, yes, this is what I need to be doing in this industry. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's a hard question. And it's hard for me because I can't really point to a singular moment where something clicked
Mm,
for me. I think it was more of a collection of smaller things that added up, plus some early successes and those things told me that maybe this is something I should pursue. And, in the end, I just feel like it was a good thing that I recognized the potential in this business very early on. And because I didn't know how hard it could be, I just jumped in with no fear. And in the early days, I was like calling ad agencies to get their creative lists. I was reaching out to any agent, no matter how big or small they were. I didn't know anyone or anything. So I didn't know that you weren't supposed to do certain things, which I
right.
think really was very valuable at the time. So I give myself credit for being forward thinking in that regard. But I don't have that like one moment where I'm like, this is it. I am going to be an actor. I acted a little bit as a kid, a little bit in high school. And once I realized that you could actually have an adult living at it, I was like, oh, this sounds like something that's could be potentially more fun than being a doctor. So let's give this a
Yeah.
try. Yeah.
For sure. Well, let's roll straight into then your number one booked it moment. Walk us through that day, the audition, callbacks, if they happen to be a part of it. What was going on in your life, and what about that moment makes it your favorite booked it moment?
I think my most memorable moment like that to date was when I got the call that I was booked on House of Cards. This was a bucket list show for me. It was one that I had been a huge fan of since the pilot. And when the audition came in, I was thrilled to just be able to read for it because it was one of the few shows that I had wanted to work on even before I moved to LA. And the whole reason behind moving from Chicago to LA was to work on things that I couldn't have access to in Chicago. So just getting the audition was like absolutely confirmation that we had made a good decision. Yes,
Mm,
physically being in LA was going to pay off in some way. So when the audition came in, I worked it with a coach. He's a good friend of mine. We taped this thing like 10 times to get it just right.
yeah.
And when I felt it was in the right place, I sent it off and it felt good to do that. But of course, 3 or 4 weeks went by and I heard nothing. So I just kind of gave up on it. And I chalked the audition up as a win. Sometimes you do that. Sometimes you're like, I got into that office. I got to audition for that particular project and
Yes.
I didn't get it, but that was a goal. So that's a win. But I remember being in my car when the phone rang. I remember the intersection. I was at a red light. I was first in line, right at the white line at the red light. And it was my manager with the good news that I was the choice. And it was just like
Oh,
the
so
most
cool.
amazing feeling, because here I was, we had really struggled with this decision to move to LA. We weren't sure if it was the right thing to do. It was expensive, it was complicated. And here was not only an audition, but a booking that was evidence that, yes, this was a good decision. So it was like a mix of excitement and relief and accomplishment. And it was a cool moment. It was fun.
So good. I love it. When it all comes together, you go up, and this is why we did this. And it makes
Exactly.
sense. Oh,
Exactly.
great story. And let's take a moment to talk about the present. What projects are you working on now? What are you looking forward to? And it's a weird time, right? We've talked about it a little bit with the pandemic and everything going on. How do you see this industry moving forward in the next couple of years?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm like a lot of people right now. I'm working on finding my next job. That's the thing I'm working on.
Yeah.
And as we record this, the industry is definitely trying to come back to normal, trying to come back to a normal production schedule, but it's happening in like fits and starts. I'm waiting for the auditions to come back to the same level where they were before. Auditions, for me at least personally, have started to come back, but very slowly. It's a trickle. So in its place, I'm doing some VO. I'm very lucky that I have clients that still hire me. And of course, the voiceover training books always need attention. I'm leaning into that. I've got my fingers crossed that a role in a pretty cool movie might actually happen. But of course, that's all rumor at this point. In terms of where the business is headed, I think the folks who had a job before everything shut down last March are probably the folks that are generally the ones working right now. I think it'll be some time, obviously. I don't know when, but for the rest of the industry to catch up and for insurance to become a non-issue, and the fact that the vaccine rollout is happening and as we record this and is rolling, I think is great. I wish I had my crystal ball, but I just don't know. What I do know is that I suspect that there will be, in terms of TV, I work mostly in TV. I'm going to guess in that genre, in that realm. I'm going to guess that there's going to be a flight to quality. Usually, when there is a lot of risk on the table, people are not as willing to try new things. So
Yeah.
I think you should probably expect to see a lot of your favorite actors working in multiple projects at once, those who have been proven to do well with audiences. And I think we might see a bit of a fall off a little bit in the quantity of shows that are being produced. For a while there, we topped out at like I think the high fours, maybe low 500 scripted series that were in production.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me if that number got cut pretty significantly, because companies just don't want to risk right now. So that's my prediction for the near future. Anything else is just totally up for grabs.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And it is time to move on to one of my favorite sections in the interview. I call it the Grease Lightning Round. I am going to ask you a handful of questions. I want you to answer them as quickly and concisely as possible, one after another. Are you ready?
I am ready. Bring it on.
Brilliant. First question. What was the one thing holding you back from committing to a career as an entertainer?
Just not knowing if I could do it long term. I was
Yeah.
mentally ready to go to med school. That's a very long term commitment. And so I was bothered by my age. Am I going to be too old to go back to medical school if I spend too much time spinning my wheels doing this? So, yeah, just the uncertainty was a barrier for sure.
Second question. What is the best piece of advice you have ever received?
I once had a teacher tell me to set it and forget it. And by that, he meant that when you do an audition, don't dwell on it for any length of time. Give yourself like 10 minutes to think about an audition and what happened in it. See if you can learn anything from that experience, but then forget about it. And that has helped me so much.
I could not agree more. And that's also a sentiment that's been shared with multiple people on this podcast. And it's going to show, look, this podcast as a resource is really showing and presenting what is a fundamental practice for those that are super successful in this industry. I think that's such good advice.
I agree.
And the third question, what is something that is working for you right now? Or if you'd like to go pre-COVID, what was working for you before our industry went on pause?
I think something that works no matter what's going on in the industry is figuring out what you're good at and being willing to lean into that. For example, I tend to be cast as a white collar authority figure guy. I'm your lawyer, I'm your astronaut, I'm your Secret Service agent, and I am okay with that as long as it continues to let me work. At a certain point, you do want to branch out for sure, because everybody thinks they can do everything, and maybe you can do everything. But if you get stuck in this certain niche, if it's making you money and if it's developing your relationships, then don't shy away from it. Just lean into it until you're at a position where you can move on to something else.
Oh, so good. And the fourth question, what is your best resource? Whether that's a book, a movie, a YouTube video, maybe a podcast or piece of technology you found is helping your career right now.
This might sound kind of weird, but honestly, I think my greatest resource right now is the commercials that are being aired on TV and online right now. And the reason for that is because I'm doing a lot of voiceover at the moment. And for me, voiceover runs in trends. It's very momentum shifting. By that, I mean that what's hot 1 month or 1 week frequently changes month to month. So I do a lot of listening to what winds up on air, and I try to take those trends into account when I do my audition prep. So I think just listening to what's out there, if you're into voiceover, is incredibly important.
And the fifth question, if you had to start your career from scratch, but you still had all the knowledge and experience you've collected from your career in this industry, what would you do or not do? Would you do anything differently, or would you keep it the same?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time waiting for something to change instead of making the change myself. So I would definitely do that differently. I would rely less on other people and rely a whole lot more on my own decision making to get me to wherever I wanted to go. And that just comes from confidence and kind of being around for a while. When I was younger, I just didn't have that confidence. I didn't have any knowledge. I did what I thought I was supposed to do, essentially. So if I was going to do it all over again, obviously I would take different steps and be much more proactive in my own career.
Oh, so good. This entire Grease Lightning round is becoming just like a masterclass of advice. It's so good. And with that, let's wrap it up with the last question. And what is the golden nugget knowledge drop you've learned from your successful career in this industry you'd like to leave with our listeners?
I got to say I have two, and I'm going to try to do these two really quickly. But the first thing is to be willing to adapt. And it doesn't matter if that's in the audition room, somebody gives you a redirect, or if it's in your choice of coach or what you want out of your career, whatever it is, just be willing to consider adapting and making changes if something's not working. If something's not working for you, fire that thing and go hire something else that will possibly work. I don't think you can be in this business very long if you're not willing to adapt. And the second thing is, I don't think you should be results driven. I don't think that you should look for results in your acting. I don't think in your career pursuits. I don't think you want to go for a result. Instead, I feel like it's a whole lot more productive to just be driven by progress, because it doesn't matter what level you're working at in this business. There is always going to be somebody else who's working more, who's getting the jobs you want to get, who's having the career you imagine yourself having. And it's easy to get discouraged when those things aren't going your way. So I think it's a whole lot more valuable to focus less on results and more on progress. If you're making progress, you're working towards a goal, you're developing, you're doing well. And I think ultimately it comes down to controlling what you can control, and don't worry about what you can't control. And when you do that, results will come. I think my focus on the journey as opposed to the destination has made me just a happier actor. I'm one that can hang around longer because I'm not as twisted in knots about how things don't happen on my timeline. It's definitely contributed to me being around for this long.
Yes, I could not agree more. Such good advice. Focusing on the journey. I've said it multiple times on the show. We've had this discussion. The journey's so important. That's where the career is, right? Well,
that's where the discovery is.
Exactly. We all have these moments. We all have these resume lines that we get, or these peaks in our career. We're like, yes, I wanted that, right? We can maybe aspire to having these things, but what I've always found, and tell me if I'm wrong, but once you achieve that thing, you do that show, whatever it might be, it happens. You're grateful for it, but then that's it.
Yeah.
You did it, and you're like, okay, now what? You just you go back to the work. You go back to how you got there in the first place.
Exactly. The idea of getting to a thing or a place is always a whole lot more tantalizing than the place itself. This is coming from somebody who I've done shoots from, with a camera guy, a sound guy, and a corporate client in an office room for $400. And then I've
Yeah.
seen the other end of it where it's like $4 million a day is spent. And I've done the red carpet walk in Hollywood and everything. And those things are cool. But when you get there, you're like, this is what it's like. All right, what's next? Because there will
Yeah.
always be something that's next. And I think you can overfocus on that destination because it's always moving. It's a moving target.
Yeah, absolutely. And to wrap up this interview, Chris, it is time to give yourself a plug. Where can we find you? How do our listeners connect with you? Is there anything you want to promote?
Well, sure. You can always follow me on the socials. I'm at Chris Agos, ChrisAgos on Instagram and Twitter. You can check out my books on Amazon. You can also visit complete-voiceover.com, where we have a bunch of books and videos and gear recommendations. It's a whole little community there. And I blog pretty regularly on the Acting in Chicago website. So if you're interested in making the Midwest as your base as an actor, there are plenty of people who do. Visit actinginchicago.com and check out all the good stuff there.
Brilliant. And for everyone listening out there, I've put the links to everything Chris just said into the description of this episode so you can easily connect with him. And also be sure to share this podcast with your fellow entertainers, coaches, teachers, art and entertainment educators, and anyone you know aspiring to create a career in this industry. You Booked It is the #1 resource of expertise on how to actually create a successful entertainment career. Case in point, everything Chris just dropped here today. So much gold. Make sure you rewind, especially that Grease Lightning round. Listen to that again. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next guest. Chris, thank you so much for being here today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Likewise, Dane, I really, really appreciate it. And it was great chatting with you. You got great questions. I've listened to the podcast for a while. It's awesome. Always good information. So I'm happy to be a part of it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode and want more like it, be sure to smash that subscribe button. Also, be sure to jump inside the brand new You Booked It community. Head over to youbookeditpodcast.com/community or tap the link in the show notes right now and take your career to the next level. Inside, you'll connect with your people and develop real industry relationships, which, by the way, this podcast has discovered is the #1 fundamental that creates long-term career success. Discover opportunities and join in on over 20 upcoming live masterclasses. Tap the link in the description of this episode, and I'll see you there.